Hello, everyone. We will start this conference. The idea is that we have about an hour and a half, 15 minutes, sorry, ahead of us to talk about something very simple, which is Europe under pressure. How can we organize safety system that is credible in face of all the threats that Europe is facing? So I'm going to introduce the 5 speakers quickly. I would like to tell everyone at the end of each session, we're going to try to take a few questions from the room in direct. So if you want to use the QR code and the Slido app, I think it's the best way to do it, so we won't have to pass the mic around the room. So as an introduction, a few words, very quick words. Of course, the Admiral Assert quoted Plato this morning, so I'm going to quote another thinker, philosopher. It's Pascal, who at the 17th century was saying this very strong sentence. Since I cannot, we couldn't make sure that the strong one would be fair. We want to make sure that the fair one be strong. So I think that really describes well the European and the Western model. We started by being strong, and now we try to be more fair as time goes by. So the world order put in place at 1945 would address this major criteria. The situation that we've experienced is a world of state of law, of right. We put in place in the 19th century the law of war. We had 30 years of dividends of peace after the World War II. Bush father talked about a new world order, so we put in place a new control of armaments in Europe. And after that, we thought that war was not going to happen again. This world has disappeared, of course. We have shifted into a world of competition, contestation, and fighting. The grammar is becoming more and more the law of the strongest, which we experience at other times of history. So what is the point that we could pursue in the middle of that between Europeans? I think it's quite simple. The first one was quoted very often by the former chief of staff of the French army, which is avoid war. We're not going to succeed with war by doing war, by waging a war. So the major responsibility of our time is to avoid war. It also goes by going back to credible deterrence, which probably has been skinned by our vision in the last 30 years. And it also goes with preparing ourselves to do something, because when you're facing enemies, there's a whole part of history that was not written by you, but by the will of the opponent. A lot of people could not imagine that the aggression against Ukraine was possible in 2022, and yet it happened. And we cannot afford to be again in such a situation. So for the panel of today, we have we're very lucky. We have some representatives of high level who have major responsibilities, and they will enlighten our debate. I will start by Madame Ambassador Nathalie Chouard, who has an experience, very rich experience. She started very young in the world of non-governmental organizations, and allowed her to go through a lot of countries that we've mentioned: Afghanistan, Iran, Russia, Madagascar. Since 2005, she has responsibility in the Swiss Foreign Affairs Department. So she has done a lot on the theme of human rights. And today you are in charge of the DCAF, which is a center, an NGO center in Geneva that is acting for security in the sector. Governance in the safety sector. Frédéric Pierucci, you worked for many years in the industry. You have worked at Alstom for quite a while for major responsibilities. You worked in China, the US, Singapore. You also were at the heart, personally, of major challenges and stakes for one part of how business is dealt with between France, Europe, and the US. And also, you are now in charge of a think tank, an advising council, and you are very active on the economic war and the application of law. Frédéric Burkhardt, you work at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Berlin. Your specialty is all the Europe files at the Brussels department office and all the challenges of international cooperation. You're also in charge of a number of countries, France and South Europe. And before your current position, you were a researcher for the same institute in the offices that you have in Jerusalem. Madame Tuya Karanko, hello. You are General Secretary of the Space, Defense and Aerospace Industries in Finland, the PIA Association. This association promotes operational conditions, competitiveness, and the network of all of its members in order to act as efficiently as possible nationally and internationally. And since Finland has joined NATO recently, I could see that you were already vice chairman for the industrial group of NATO, the NATO group for industrial advice. And to finish, Mr. Eric Michel, you've been working in Brussels for about 10 years for the Airbus Group. In the world of public affairs, you had before a long career in the industry sector around questions of helicopters that remain in your portfolio of actions in Brussels. To begin the debates, just to set the tone, I would like to ask each of you if they could characterize this new world that is ours today and this complete shift of paradigm that we've seen and we've heard about in all the debates. Can you, each of you, give us one little anecdote that would make us realize that for a year or two, really, we have completely changed the world? Tuya, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I must go back about 2.5 years to the days right after Russia attacked Ukraine and the shift that we saw in the Finnish people and the people of Finland wanted to join NATO and turn the heads of our politicians to join NATO. I think that was remarkable, and to me that was a great shift.
Philippe? Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was more or less the same occasion because for me I realized that the world is changing when the then German Federal Chancellor Olaf Scholz was after the Russian invasion to Ukraine was speaking in front of Parliament and was talking about Zeitenwende, like the big changes of time that we are witnessing, and therefore he agreed with his government on breaking the debt brake which existed in Germany for military reasons, which was quite extraordinarily. So this is basically, I think, the latest point you could realize that things have changed.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. If I would like to go back further in time, I thought of 2017. I was already at the UN in New York, and I remember the first speeches and the first speech by Nikki Haley, who was the representative of the Trump administration #1. There was a big change of tone, and the attacks on multilateralism were quite numerous. And at the time, we didn't fully realize how it was going to come back or go even faster. We talked about acceleration this morning, and that's what this is about. I remember this moment vividly and the shock that it created. But I think that at the time, we felt that we were going to rebound from it. Frédéric, sorry. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your invitation. For Airbus and for many industrial, 2022 was a year where we saw a shock in Brussels, a wake-up call. It translated itself in the observation of an intensification between the coalition and the member states on the implementation of many tools to help the defense industry, with a priority, of course, in favor for Ukraine. The European Fund for Defense already existed, but all the Brussels acronym that show the will to support the defense industry. At the same time, 2022, 2024, we've seen an increase of the acquisition of equipment within the American companies. It's 90% of defense that have been made from member states outside of the EU. 2/3 of them represent the suppliers, American supplies. So we really felt that there was this trend, very strong trend, and for industrials, we had to find ways of using those tools and those devices to reinforce our capacities. Eric, for me, it was in Saudi Arabia that it happened, a major event. It was Aramco decided to sell it oil at RMB. We saw that an actor who was linked to the U.S. Since the Quincy Agreement started to look at the world in a very different way and drop his American partners. So that has defined a lot of the international relationship of this time. Thank you very much. So to launch the debate, I'm going to give the floor to each of you, one after the other, so you can develop from your own position, from your own current responsibility, the way that you see the major challenges of the moment.
Philippe, due to your specific position, I would like you to give us a general overview of current strategic challenges for Europe. How do you see the speed of change, the level of emergency we are facing? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, General. I'm sorry, I have a bit of a cold, but I will endure this here. Thank you very much. I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to talk here. And I think like one of the main things we have to consider, the topic we are discussing here is very broad and very general. So therefore, I will concentrate on essential points which are, in my opinion, crucial and maybe perhaps are underestimated in some debates. And these ideas I would like to throw into the debate in the form of 3 hypotheses I developed before coming here to Toulon in order to maybe set a framework for a discussion or what, in my opinion, or what I experience in my work, or like also together with my colleagues worldwide, what problems may be or what kind of problems may arise. The first point I want to address is that there is a difference between perspectives within Europe. This difference in perspectives of individual countries differ too greatly for an effective European defense capabilities. And in my opinion, it's very problematic to overcome these differences in perspective. And maybe you can also go back and explain how this could happen when you go back to the Cold War. In my view, the bipolarity of the Cold War had at least the advantage that parts of the world gravitated more or less strongly toward one of the two poles in the world, the United States as well as the Soviet Union. So either you belong to the West or to the East. Of course, this is much more true for Europe, since like even during the Cold War, we witnessed a lot of wars by proxies in different parts of the world. But anyhow, on crucial issues, the European countries were either on the West or on the East. And so today we are dealing with a different geopolitical reality. I can think about rejecting normatively multipolarity, but in my point of view, there's no reason to assume that it does not exist. As a result, the cohesion effects we knew from the Cold War no longer function in this multipolar world. And in this respect, for instance, the difference or the perspectives of Spain and Estonia will always differ. Of course, Estonia is looking towards east and is seeing the threats posed by Russia. But a different perspective, for instance, has Spain, who is looking to the south and maybe is fearing coup d'etats in the Sahel zone or migration influx and the threats and challenges these developments or possible developments can pose to Europe. And honestly speaking, when we look back into the debates of the 2000s or late 2000s or early 2010s, this is the time when I was politically socialized. I did my high school diploma, I was starting university. it was a completely different discussion we were having in Europe. We were talking about our investment in Afghanistan. In Germany, we were talking about the Good Friday battle in Afghanistan, which was one of the most intense battles that Germany fought during the war in Afghanistan. And no one, at least in Germany, would come to the idea that, okay, let's prepare for a fully conventional war on the Eastern Front because Russia is posing this threat. Like, no one would have thought about this. So we also have to think about that when we now look back, that we also had different perspectives. And what I mean by this is, if we think these developments through further, it is not unlikely, but rather probable, that we will experience another such shock in the foreseeable future, like the shock we experienced in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. Because the threats of uprisings, regime change, jihadism, and all the other things that could be possible threats, they are not ceased, but we are, rightly so, focusing currently on other things, but a new shock that catches us unprepared is more likely than unlikely, in my opinion. The second thesis I would throw into the debate is the institutions in Europe are not equipped to deal with the current security policy challenges, either in terms of their design or their framework conditions. I mean, what do I mean by it? In order to be prepared for all the threats that are arising and to be able to summarize them or abstract them to form a European perspective, you need effective institutions. This applies both on intergovernmental level, but also on a national level. And I think when we look at the title of this panel, it's a bit reflected also in this title. We are talking about Europe under pressure. What exactly does Europe mean in this context? Does it mean the member states of the European Union? And if so, why without the UK? Or does it mean the member states or European countries that are members of NATO? If so, is Turkey a part of it? I think, it's a major security actor in our neighborhood and also in Europe, so is it part of it or not? I'm sitting next to an ambassador from Switzerland to talk about common security challenge and somehow collective defense. So if you have anything revolutionary from Switzerland to announce, I would be excited to hear this. So we are not really sure about what we are actually talking about. Like we don't know how to frame it because we don't have any institutions that work and that can address probably the challenges we face, so we just label it with Europe. And you also see it reflected in the uprising, I would say, of ad hoc formata. Everyone is talking about the coalition of the willing because it's a coalition of states that should somehow play a role, but are not together in a format without spoilers like maybe Hungary or Slovakia. And at the same time, similar problems arise on a national level. Because in Europe we face an era, in my opinion, of a lack of political stability and predictability. This is not because we live in worse time than before, but just in different times. If we look, for instance, at the German government, like the new German federal government, there are so many expectations posed to expectations for the new German government to be a key actor in Europe, to play a key role. But of course, the new German government also needs partners. And now today we are in the beautiful Toulon in France. And if we remember what just 2 days ago happened in France, like with whom should we work? So we need some kind of stability and predictability. Otherwise, we will not be able to face the challenges of the future. In a nutshell, because you mentioned that I worked on the Middle East before, we can see it also on the Middle East issue. We are currently, it's the immediate neighborhood of Europe, and we are currently facing one of the most severe crises in the Middle East for decades. It is not very unlikely that we have, in the foreseeable future, 1,500,000, 1.5 million, I don't know, Palestinian refugees. It's not unlikely, look what's going on, that are likely to leave the Gaza Strip, somewhere to Egypt maybe, but they of course won't stay in Egypt. And I'm afraid that should a thing like this happen, that we face this kind of, I don't know, Palestinian refugee crisis, that Europe once again is not prepared for it because we are not able to deal with the issues, even in our immediate neighborhood. Given the fact, by the way, that this is not a surprisingly new conflict, it's a conflict that is at least 100 years old. I wanted to end my first statement with some maybe positive outlook, although it was a bit hard, in my opinion, to find one. But my third thesis would be one of our greatest weaknesses may be over-coordination, but one of our greatest strengths is our coordination skills. What do I mean by this? In order to make decisions effectively as an alliance and coordinate them effectively, you need institutional capabilities and well-established processes, and we all have these processes in Europe and we are experienced with it. Currently there are a few, I would say, specters hunting the international debate. People are talking about CRINC, a few Germans do. I don't know if you ever heard about it. It's the so-called alliance between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. This kind of new axis of evil that will spoil everything the West does and will ruin the current world order. I think this term is particularly useless. But if we look at other examples too, take for instance BRICS. BRICS was mentioned, I think, in the very first panel. BRICS itself does not have a permanent structure. There is the New Development Fund with, I looked it up, around 300 employees. 300 employees for the whole of the BRICS structure is not that much. I work for an organization. We have worldwide more than 1,000 employees. As far as I have heard in the last staff meeting, we are not planning to take over world rule as our organization, as CAS. So if you want to be a counterpart of the West and to really throw over the current world order and even if you want Western-dominated world order, you need capabilities. You need institutions, you need channels for coordination, and neither BRICS does it have. CRINC is like just really a specter, in my opinion, and even the very first panel, the Shanghai Organization of Cooperation was mentioned. I think also this, the Secretary General in Beijing has about maximum 1,000 employees. If you take, for instance, as a comparison, NATO, I think NATO in Brussels alone has more than 4,000 employees. Just to make sure, like, what kind of an effort it is to re-establish or to create a new world order. And I think if we optimize these advantages, our coordination capabilities, if we reform them in an effective way, we will also be able to organize European, whatever this means in the end, defense effectively and credibly. And I would leave it with this for the first part, and maybe we can talk about different things later.
Thank you for this very positive view of what European administration and organization could provide on the long term. Nathalie, je voudrais maintenant vous laisser la parole. Vous avez une expérience tout à fait unique, à la fois
in the crisis areas and the way in which international organizations, whether it's non-governmental or states, regardless of the type of organization, the way that they've been able to manage these crises. So in that way, you're a very good representative of the world that we might have dreamed about 30 years ago. How do you see things today? The challenges that we're facing, and the international organizations and the multinational corporations, the UN, the non-governmental organizations, do you think that they're in a bad place? Or do you think all these different challenges that we're meeting to govern in different areas and their expertise is still part of the current setup at the international level? Thank you to have invited me, and thank you for asking me that question and inviting me to your debate. I'd also like to say that I'm also here as the director of the Geneva Center for Governance and Safety. I am also am second in from Switzerland, so I could also talk some different perspectives that we have in Switzerland as well, and the different discussions we have there as well, which concern European security, without making any major announcements today, but I would be happy to speak about that later. But to come back to the question we were talking about, and talk about the type of work we do. The COP that I work at in Geneva, we're right in the heart of this ecosystem, a multilateral system, which of course has been affected by all the different changes that we're going through right now. But it's also a Swiss foundation that was created by the Confederation 25 years ago. And it was created as part of a partnership for peace that was launched by NATO. And our organization was designed to contribute as one means of the way Switzerland could contribute to partnerships for peace. Initially, the idea was to accompany all the Eastern countries, help them to understand what democratic standards were in order to work together with the EU and with NATO. And then the Swiss initiative was, of course, interlinked with human safety and also in security, also to concentrate on individuals and not just on different borders. And the motto of the DCAF is to promote safety of states and of their populations. Just to answer your question, no, it's not the same. Obviously, our role has changed from what it was 25 years ago. We've had to be very flexible. Innovation is also important for all the different participants in the area I work in the also of peacekeeping as well, or working for peace. The situation is very complex now, of unequal complexity. There's a lot more competition now. We're in a much more transactional system, and multilateralism has definitely weakened. But what I also think is also very important is for our work is there's a loss of trust. We talked about that this morning as well, a loss of credibility. And there's also social fractures that we see everywhere. And this is also an important factor in this vulnerability we see in our societies now. That said, what I'd like to talk about is our commitment out in the field, though. I'd also talk about multilateral commitments a little bit further down the road. But there is a lot of commitments that we've made, and there's a lot of lessons learned that we can take from the last 25 years of experience. And we have worked with many different actors, ministers, security forces, the more traditional actors in this sector, but also more and more with parliaments, with the civil society, with different communities, and also with regional organizations. And I think that's also very important as well. And for me, as part of the debate we're having today, in terms of how Europe can organize a credible defense against its threats, I would like to talk about three different elements. About the credible defense is based on three different pillars. One, as you mentioned, is our capacities. I think it's something we'll also talk about in other debates today. It's also is political willingness, which the ambassador talked about this morning, and also about governance and the democratic legitimacy. And that's the three areas I'd like to talk about today. But I'd also like to add something, a little nuance about this in the discussion about the defense sector. We often limit defense to the military elements. Of course, it's a crucial element of defense, but it's not the only one. Of course, governance also are other elements over the long term that are an important part of a complex response that we need to give. Maybe it's not what we want to hear today, but we have to have a response at the European level. And I think governance is also another important element of a credible defense. And the European Defense Force, as in other contexts, it's not just the means we already have acquired, but it's also the ones we need to acquire. And also there's other crucial aspects which concern governance. Transparency, for example, inclusion is important as well, and taking responsibility for our actions. And our defense capacities, which is what the heart of our debates today, both here today and in our parliaments and also in Switzerland, we can't talk about long-term stability if we don't talk about governance. And I think the risk is that these risks that we're facing are going to fragilize our organizations from the entire. And we see that in our organization out in the field. It can be our defense capabilities in terms of equipment, in terms of the balance of power that we've talked about. How can we give a capacity of a resiliency to countries? It's its institutions, as we talked about earlier, and its citizens. The citizens of a country will only participate in a strategic vision and believe in it They will only consent to make the sacrifices, whether it be economic or other, if they trust their governments, if they trust their institutions, if they trust their armed forces, if they feel that they are protected, both physically and also in their rights. And I would think that this is an element that we might not think of, and a lot of people forget today. So for me, trust is fundamental at many different levels. This is also based on the governance in each sector that is performed correctly. And in particular, transparency in governance is important. So this will all means political debate, which has clear objectives in terms of security and defense. And I think the medias, the parliaments, and all the different actors in the civil society must be associated with this debate about security. They must be able to ask questions. They must back up the decisions made by decision makers. And that's where the democratic controls are fundamental. And I also like to say, and this is also linked to the crisis we see in multilateralism today, when we see that people are spending more and more on defense, often taking away money from other areas, such as international cooperation is losing its funding, particularly in Europe. Aid is being reduced significantly. And I think from this point of view, that's something we also have to look at is accountability. If we look at, there's not a lot of public money available and public funds, so it's crucial that we make good investments now and we make effective and efficient investments. For me, the investments that we make, once again, substantial investments in weapons and arms, can only be a success and long-standing if it's based on good governance. So I think these are questions we need to work on. Budgetary transparency. So this goes through all different areas. We have to talk about corruption in all the different domains. Transparency is important. And also, no soldiers are going to risk their lives, or any citizens are going to risk their lives, or are going to have to withstand all the problems that war can lead to, or are either willing to accept the drastic budgetary restrictions if they don't feel, if they feel they will not agree to them if they feel that they've been left behind by the authorities or the people in power. So as you've understood, we think credible defense cannot be limited just to military expenditures. It also is political and institutional means as well. And also the democratic legitimacy is an important element that can be a multiplier in our defense systems, because if not, even our defense means can be manipulated and lead to internal strife. And I think that our democracies are particularly fragile right now and vulnerable, faced to the hybrid attacks that we've talked about a lot this morning, also in terms of disinformation, and is particularly the case in terms of public opinion, which are very fragmented right now. Now, we can see, for example, in Moldavia or in other places around the continent, that our security can be resilient based on misinformation, based on different shocks, as you said, or different crises, as you mentioned about present or future. We have to protect the platforms. We have to find privileged spaces for debate and protect people's rights. So from my point of view, I would say that right now there is a gap between security, the hard security you might say, or direct security, which is now up for debate again about our defense systems, and also what we might call human defense. And this concept of human defense is a concept that our organization that I work for was based on when it was first built. And we need to find a good balance between these two concepts. It's important to have a good balance between the both, state security and human security. And I would like to just finish with a few words from the General Secretary of the European Council, who was the former president of Swiss, Alain Berset, who said, without legitimacy, without trust, and without rights, no army can protect us, regardless of how big it is. Thank you for those words.
With my neighbor, Tuya, thank you very much. You come from the front line, if I may. Finland has just brought to Europe a very strong advantage today in its geopolitical situation. You have joined NATO, and as you said it before, it has been a huge revolution. How would you characterize for your country and from where you are the shift, the level of the change brought by Ukraine aggression in the way Finland is considering its 360 security and defense within Europe?
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Natalie, for really paving the way for my thinking. Because when I started preparing for this panel, how can a credible defense be organized to face threats? I wanted to talk about what NATO calls for multi-domain operations and the civilian part of it, where Natalie just left, and how we see that in Finland, and how I see that we must change the way we look at our comprehensive security as societies. So it's not just for the authorities, but companies, businesses, the third sector, and we as individuals, we all need to take a stand and play our role, and that is something that I'd like to talk about. However, if you allow me, I'd like to start with a few facts about Finland. I do not want to be patronizing, but since I'm not aware of how well the audience here is aware of Finland, just a few things so that you kind of maybe understand my perspective a little bit more. We are a population of 5.6 million people, so France is 11 times bigger. We are the 7th largest nation in Europe with a population density of 18 per square kilometer. If you had the same in France, you would have about 10 million people altogether. So just to give a perspective. We share NATO's longest border with Russia, 103,045 kilometers to be quite exact, which when we joined NATO doubled the borderline with NATO countries and Russia. We have a wartime strength of troops about the same size than France. We have a trained reserve of almost 1 million people, bearing in mind that this is a country of 5.6 million people. Defending the nation is in our DNA, and our authorities, especially the military, is the most respected institution there is in Finland. And throughout our history, this is something that we believe in. We are members of the society. This is our task. And the General Conscription Service makes defense and defending the nation really a thing that every family needs to think about. Every husband, every son, every father, brother has had to make the decision whether or not to serve the military. But in spite of all of this, we are not a militarized society, quite the contrary. But I think it's important kind of for you to understand that if what I say may sound a bit foreign, it's because this is where I come from. And then when I think of when Finland joined NATO, as I said, it was a big shift in the mindset. And the system that we have been building since the Second World War was built on the idea that we must cope on this alone, that we are by ourselves. If all goes well, somebody will say a declaration that they are very sorry and Finland should not be facing such aggression from the east, but that's basically it. The Swedes maybe might send us a few socks, but basically that's the kind of support that we were really, really preparing for. And now all of a sudden we are part of the alliance and under the NATO deterrence. And we are still in the process of understanding this, and kind of with the idea that we are not on our own and that we need to open up our plans and our capabilities and moreover our capability gaps. But we do see ourselves as net contributors to the NATO and to European defense. And this is not just the military strength of Finland, but also the idea of multi-domain operations. since Finland is a logistical island, there is a small map over there, but we really are a logistical island. So that too has formed the idea of comprehensive security, where we fight on our own, but it involves the whole of society approach. So as I said, every company, every citizen, every authority. And the national defense, the defense forces being just one part of it. And for me, as the advocacy for the defense industry, this then relates to the fact that even though Finland procures most of its military systems from abroad, we need to have some kind of autonomy in the functioning and in the maintenance of those systems. And the Finnish companies, be it then healthcare companies, be it then the pharmaceutical company, be it then an individual farm or a defense contractor, they need to be prepared. And this is what we are working on in Finland. For decades, we have built structures, we have the authorities in place, we have the funding in place so that we have the stockpiles that certainly are not enough, but nevertheless there is a stockpiling system, there is a circulation system of those stockpiles, and most of the companies, mind me, they take part in this on a voluntary basis with no funding from the government, with no guarantees of future procurements or of future customers. Because their task, their mission, and especially in the defense sector, is to defend Finland and now the alliance. And this is the thing that I'd like to bring to the table. And as I said, we need to rethink the relationship between industry and governments when it comes to military and security. So why would a company with no reimbursement start supporting the military? Why would they do that? My pitch for companies is that it is in their own interest, well, first of all, for existence, definitely, but it is in their own interest also during normal times. So if you have, as a company, if you have your contingency plans in place, your preparedness plans in place, if you know what to do when there is an electrical breakdown for 3 hours or 3 days, or your sewer is not working, or there is a pandemic, you know what to do, you are much better off in the long term in your business than you would be otherwise. And I already learned this during the pandemics, and moreover, during the years of aggression now that we have seen, that we have defense companies, even in Europe, who bluntly tell me that they are not prepared. Nobody is paying for them to be prepared for war. And to me, that is shocking. And I cannot tolerate that kind of thinking. I do understand business, and I do understand business logic. And this is the reason why we must change the way we work with governments. We need to come together and think of the ever-warm capabilities and the capacities that are needed, and think that how could we do this together? Because at the end of the line, the mission of defense industry is to support our democratic values. So this is what I'd like to see as a challenge, but also as a very big opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Donc, une vision assez forte de ce que doit...
So a very strong vision of the role of the major defense industries in the defense of Europe and their countries. So Eric, you work in one of the biggest European firms, which has shown that a lot of what Europe is capable on both militarily and technologically. Can you talk about the current business model at Airbus in terms of cooperation in Europe, how they work, How do you integrate this international dimension, this gigantic globalization aspects between China and the United States? And what are the keys to this new context? How do we need to change our model? Maybe I could start, I could make a kind of build on what the ambassador Vimont said earlier, which is that the industry, Airbus in particular, we have taken note of the geopolitical factors that we have to that have been imposed by the United States and their hegemonic ambitions. It's not part of our debate, but also China as well and their projects to take over world power. Of course, based on their defense budgets, but also on the enormous markets that China represents, and who also has the commands, and also the whole legal arsenal at their disposal. Beyond just talking about the fragility the weaknesses that are being created by Russia, Airbus, when we look at these geopolitical factors, we try to contribute in saying, when we look at defense issues, and for the European Union in particular, the challenge isn't in the economic factors, but more sovereignty, to guarantee European sovereignty. For the European Union, to guarantee our strategic autonomy. And the way in which Airbus plans on participating in this is through cooperation, through industrial cooperation. That's our DNA. That's how we were founded. That's how Airbus was even founded. And that's what we're looking to move as we move forward. But we have to be aware of the fact also that this cooperative model, it can be criticized. Why? Because the cooperative model is very demanding. Sometimes it can take longer than we'd like. It's also a model that can be difficult and also can be more expensive than if it was just at the single state level. But in the end, we would say that something that if it was just at the national level would cost, let's say, 100. If we put two or three countries together, it might cost less. It might cost less than it would cost if one country was just working out by themselves. And that was how our budgets are based on. The 400M, for example, the STT, the NH90, for example. But we also keep in mind that cooperation, and we know this at Airbus, is difficult, and it's also very demanding, because cooperation doesn't mean we have to cooperate in everything. We have to respect the skills that are specific to each country, together with each member state. But this is our way of thinking, is that this model makes us credible in order to ensure our autonomy, strategic autonomy in Europe. Because if we work together, we have effective scale, which is very important. We can also reunite investors because they're more and more expensive. So it helps us to get the funds we need and helps us to work together to make the investments we need to be credible and to ensure our sovereignty of the European Union. And also create a dynamic industrial framework and network which we can strengthen and develop together with the member states who work together with us. And we've seen this in a lot of different cooperative efforts we've made. For example, the European Defense Fund, where we work together in a consortium with other member states and industries. So that's our DNA. And that's the model that Airbus has always been based on. To answer the other question, talk about the challenges we're facing, I think in the current period right now, and getting back to this idea of strategic autonomy, there is one fundamental point we think at Airbus is to properly state and be complementary with NATO. This is an essential point. Personally, I think this is something that we don't necessarily frame correctly. It's not presented very well. We get the feeling there's a kind of a competition between NATO and the European Union. For me, that's not the question. For me, it's more the organizations, whether it be NATO or the organization of the European Commission, and they can each have their separate ambitions or motivations. I think that's normal, and I think we understand that. However, the two organizations have members who are pretty much the same, because 80% of the members of NATO are also members of the European Union. So we, as manufacturers, we can't be schizophrenic in the sense we'd have certain states in the morning when they're talking with NATO on the left hand, on one hand is going to say we're going to the left, and if the European Union say no, we're going to go to the right, that's not going to work. We have to be complementary. And this complementary nature of, as we see in Airbus, and this is something you mentioned early, we talked about the helicopters, where we're talking about the future combat helicopter. We use the current financial instruments available in the European Union to develop what we call technological bricks. And we're also going to base that on a NATO format so that these bricks can be used in operational frameworks for NATO. So they're really complementary aspects that we're trying to build on. And this is a challenge for us, to make sure that the work we do with each organization are complementary. If not, it's going to slow us down and lead to misunderstanding between both organizations. The second challenge, I think, is how we can create a proper framework for the members of the European Union to define what are our needs and our priorities. Working together with the Commission. And I think it's important to give it in that order, because as the ambassador said earlier, there's certain type of rules about how things work in Europe, how institutions work, and how the member states function. The member states have their own skills in defense. So it's together with the state members that we, the manufacturers, that we have our discussions to define what are the needs and now or in the future of each member country. Of course, we discuss with the Commission so they know what we, the manufacturers, are capable of doing. But in the end, the choice of capacities will be made in discussions between the member states, and we'll look for a convergence between all the different states, because there are 27, working together with the Commission. That's basically how we work. That's how we work on the European Defence Funds. That's how we work on these different financial instruments that are being put in place, such as the one called the SAFE instrument. And the third challenge, I would say, which kind of builds on the first one we talked about, is that complementarity between the EU and NATO, is the notion of how the European Commission and how these financial instruments that it develops, how we give a European preference. The European preference does not exclude working in a bilateral configuration with other states, with other countries that are not in the EU, but it's in a way of saying if the EU wants to be credible in its autonomy, it has to be able to ensure the development of its own industry and its own defense industry. In a case that I know very well, which is helicopters again, there's a problem if I see that's one of our competitors and one of our American competitors, who we respect, of course, in principle. We respect competition, of course. But if it defines its helicopter in America, it builds its helicopter in the United States, and most of the kits that it makes, that it puts in its crates, and then it sends to us in Europe. And then all the kits are taken apart and presented to European countries and can benefit from financing in Europe. I think there's a problem here. So I think that's something we need to think about. And it's not easy to really understand these problems, because it's on a state level. All the member states might not be convinced of this preference for Europe that we'd like to put in our text. In any case, it's something that we are pushing in Airbus in terms of because we are firmly a European company. And those are the three challenges I think that.
Thank you very much. The debates are very well organized, because you're giving me the transition to Frederick. Frederick, you have a very clear interest on accountability and governance, with a very strong expertise in the relationships between Europe and the US, and mostly under the prism of competition. So how do you organize a defense by succeeding in getting to converge the current visions that are quite different of the United States and Europe? And to what point is there a possibility to shape a common way to go, or are we facing a competition with the U.S.? Yeah, it seems like we're looking east and we're looking west, and we're kind of, we cannot have strategic autonomy without thinking again about our relationship to the States. And I'm going to try to make a comparison between the relationship that we have with the U.S. with a movie that you all know, which is it's a French movie called Tanguy, and it's a story of parents who are trying to kick out their son who's 30 years old but refuses to leave the parents' house. So if I make this comparison, is when we're young in the 90s, our father or mother wanted to control gradually what we're doing. So we, first of all, they would check the phone where we are to see what we're saying. That's what the U.S. are doing right now by putting in place all these PRISM scale, Patriot Act projects to spy massively French companies and Europeans themselves. Then when you're a parent, you want to know what your kids are doing with their pocket money. So the United States put in place the SWIFT system to make sure that they would check how we spend our money. They put in place, by imposing the dollar as the trading currency in most world markets. And then when you're a teenager, you start to do, some stupid things. And the United States have put in place a number of laws to against corruption, which is good in itself, against for human rights, to protect human rights, because what they forgot, is they should apply those rules to themselves, like our parents would forget that they also made mistakes before they tried to control what their kids are doing. I would like to remind you of a few numbers. The European companies paid over $50 billion for fines to the U.S. Treasury because of the use of dollar and American digital tools. So we grew up a bit and we started to do some DIY in our own garage and maybe build up the new computer. And then the Americans turn to us and say, well, if you start making your own equipment with American equipment, we're also going to impose to you some sanctions on you. It's going to be ITAR, it's going to be ER, and just to control what you're doing and to control your products. So, and then when we grew up even more, we wanted to make a bit of money. We started selling what we have been manufacturing in our garage, and our friends, which are American friends, we're going to control, we're going to sell those products and who you're going to do business with. So this is international sanctions, but also with whom your friends are going to make business with. So this is a secondary American sanction. So with all this package, we've been in a prison, and we've been pretty much tied to the U.S. on all fronts. So what is new now is our parents are getting divorced. And it's daddy who has custody of the children, and he really wants to kick us out because we're 32 years old, and he really wants to cut the umbilical cord. And if we don't do it, he's doing it on his own. So he's telling us, well, now you have to fend for yourself. The roof, that is the NATO, that was supposed to be the roof over our head. I'm, kicking you out of this roof and just go live somewhere else and fend for yourself. So we need to reinvent ourselves clearly. So some of us want to adopt us. The Chinese would love to adopt us, the Russians, or, but we are at the crossroads to try to figure out what we want to do with our life. We're 32 years old. We have to figure out if we want to be autonomous or if we still want to force daddy to take us back under his roof. So this is a real topic here because we need to have a long-term vision for the youth. We cannot just give them a vision in 2 or 3 years. We need to give them a vision in 52 years. Like the Admiral Osser said this morning, we're facing a strategic disruption at the moment. So we need to give this vision to our children, and this vision has to start with strategic autonomy, with our own strategic autonomy. If we still depend on NATO, on American equipment, on American softwares, on American digital tools, we will never be autonomous from a strategic point of view. When we talk about autonomous strategy, and we do everything under the roof, the umbrella of NATO, that's a contradiction in itself. We're going to have to take decisions on our own. It may take some time, but we have to give ourselves a clear vision to know where we're going. Without strategic autonomy, let's not talk about industrial sovereignty, digital sovereignty, or even legal sovereignty, as long as we don't have a strategic autonomy. Thank you very much. fascinating debates, and I think we have talked a lot about in depth about many topics. We have about 15 minutes left. I'd like to start launching the debate again with each of you on a specific angle that you didn't give first, that is part of your responsibility and your experience, and on which you can give us an interesting testimony for our audience of today. Philippe?
To speak us about where stand Germany today. You have just said that France was not in its best physical situation today, but Germany was really in the heart of the Euro-Atlantic relationship, and today is in the heart of what could be the future of Europe. At the same time, probably less will to cooperate, temptation to do a lot of things by itself. So how would you see that? Not too long, if I may.
Yeah, sorry. I will try to answer this question quickly. Where does Germany stand? It's quite a big question. It's difficult to answer this precisely right now. I think Germany, when we talk about defense of European defense capabilities, Germany faces a lot of internal discussions which are crucial to Germany. You can label it, like generally spoken, with the history of Germany that makes a lot of Germans feel quite uncomfortable. I mean, you talked about the whole of society approach when it comes to defense. Like, of course, you should not compare what must not be compared. But if you would talk the same in Germany, like people, like alarm bells would ring if such an approach would be promoted. What I want to say about Germany, maybe like to point one thing out, and what reflects maybe also a bit other speakers have talked about here. Strategic autonomy is a good thing that should be achieved, but I think senior policymakers, senior politicians, senior decision makers should not talk about it. Why? Because we already talked about how unforeseeable the Trump administration works. And if we, I think at the current phase, we still need the Americans in. I think we can all agree on this, that we still need Americans in. We are not able to do it on our own. But if we pretend that we are fine and we are strategically autonomous as Europe, whatever it means in the end, you could maybe this could be a catalyst for another crazy decision by the Trump administration that might not be foreseeable right now. I don't know, leaving NATO or but it's some kind of thing. We should try it, or we should strive for it. We should strive for strategic autonomy, but we should not talk too much about it in order to keep, for the moment, the Americans in.
It's an old principle, think to it permanently, but never tell it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Tuya.
Position. You started to speak about it. How do you articulate autonomy by your own industry, some sort of European resilience? I don't know if it's preference, but at least resilience. And still for you, and we just have to be objective, a strong link with the US. How all this is possible in a high-intensity scenario warfare?
Thank you. A great question, and I was anticipating this. When you are from a country which cannot be autonomous ever in any capability area, so you will always need to rely, at least to a certain extent, on foreign companies or well, in this case, foreign companies. So you can never have all the spectrum of capabilities and technologies in your own hand. So then you start making risk assessments. What is it? What is our spearhead capabilities that we need to have in own hands, and how much of a big risk can we take and procure it from abroad? And then in that assessment, at least previously in Finland, it has not played a role? Does it come from Europe, or does it come from the US, or even from Israel? And so the thinking is that if you don't have it in hand, inside domestically, then you make the risk assessment, and with whom do you cooperate? And I know that this is a challenge for many of our European colleagues, and we in the Nordics, we have this strong transatlantic link. But when I think of the big picture, and of course we in particular in the eastern and northeastern flank are very concerned about Russian actions at the moment and the war in Europe. But when I think of the very, very big picture, I'm afraid this is just a sidekick to what's happening in the world. So when we talk about strategic autonomy, and just like Philip said, we still need the US, but we are still like-minded, and I think that the real threat comes from China, and we are entering a world of technological competition where we need to find ways of working together. So yes, I do see, and I do share the idea that we need to be stronger in Europe. But one colleague from a company said it very bluntly, that, well, maybe in Europe we just need to start producing more attractive systems so that the European customers will buy them. And I think that is something that we all need to take back. Look in the mirror and just start doing it instead of talking so much about it and remembering the big picture.
Thank you very much. Eric, un développement.
A development that is a bit different than we usually hear on the complementarity between the EU and NATO that could be shared by the other people in the room. Just a quick point, your debates, your current debates, and your key points of negotiation. I don't want to get into your industrial secrets, but at Brussels, what are the key points that you're fighting on, and where do you want to get some decisions on? The point that you mentioned on the complementarity between EU and NATO, I want to go back to this because it could be a transition, the link between all of us, the way that we're looking at it. I'm going to take an example, a very simple example. If we imagine that right now we're all at the same time in a NATO meeting, and on the stage we represent different member states of the EU, and we identify that the threat coming from Cannes or I don't know where, and in this meeting in NATO right now we identify the threat, and we've decided to deal with it, means that by leaving the room, we're going to find ourselves in an EU format to talk among ourselves what kind of weapons do we have and we don't have, and the ones that we need to develop to be able to react to this threat, and to get back to a NATO meeting to debrief and to share the findings, the feedback. So this is this complementarity I present in a very simple way that we really believe it in Airbus. So among our priorities that we identify and that we deal with in Brussels, they're linked to NATO. I don't want to go back into on the instruments of European funding, but we think with our member states, with the structure of NATO, that the ACT, on all the evolution of threats, the indications of scenarios that NATO can give us in order for us industrials, we can discuss them in formats with NATO, and we can say that, okay, we're thinking about making such and such technological progress in terms of collaborative fighting, to be swift, to make sure that later on, NATO would integrate this data and be able to translate them and pass them down to the member states, and we could work ourselves, the industry, in the framework of the laws of military programming. So you have the multi-operation. That's one. It's an imperative for us in the fight of the future, which is collecting all the information of the battlefields, air, space, land, and also we'll call the MOSA, which is the Modular Open System Architecture, which is the way that we can plug into a system to share the data. We can now plug in our PC, our phone, our tablets. All of the member states and the nations must satisfy this goal, must apply to this goal, comply to this goal. And that's what we treat in the format of the EU throughout defense mechanisms. Thank you very much. Frederic, with your sharp eye on the reality of the competition, how the French industry can do well with what's going on in Europe versus the other European countries. What are France's advantages and skills and trump cards, or room for improvement? First of all, I'm making an assessment. Nobody has an interest in having a strong Europe. The U.S. don't, Russia doesn't, and China doesn't. Nobody has any interest to see a strong defense industry in Europe, particularly not the U.S., even less so Russia or China. So we have to start from this statement. Today, we are in a situation where it is very easy to make a mess among other European players and set them up against each other. And we see it with all these debates between France and Germany to see what part would be able to be manufactured outside of Europe, designed outside of Europe to benefit from these European funds. So we see that the chaos is very easy to create chaos within European countries because everybody's looking just at their own interest, and Germany does it, France does it, and there's no such thing as a French-German couple on those topics. The main subject here is to know if at one point we will not be some follow-up, and the day that we're going to just follow others, and the day we turn around and watch behind us, there will be nobody behind us because we have just followed others. Ukraine, we all, got ready and marched, and now we don't really know if there's anybody following us anymore. And tomorrow we're going to go on China, we're going to set our course on China, and maybe there's going to be an agreement between China and the U.S., and we'll be again completely isolated. So I think there's a common interest to have a sovereign positioning, even within the states, or at least some form of European strategic autonomy to defend our own interests. Our interests are not the interests of the US, China, or Russia. And we really need to put this in our mind because we need to give our generation a vision, a long-term vision, not a short-term vision such as the end of the war in Ukraine, the end of the problems in the Middle East. We need to really give the new generation a long-term vision. Thank you very much. The word of the end, Nathalie, you were very convincing on the needs to have multilateralism and keep governance within our democratic societies. So I'm going to ask you a different question. You looked at the possibility to talk about your country, Switzerland. And a lot of them think it's a strategic El Dorado, surrounded with, rich countries, a good level of life. And yet Switzerland is wondering as well about the strategic autonomy. Where does Switzerland stand on this? This is a major public debate, and I think that to set things in their context, in Switzerland, we have this vision of security that goes way beyond defense, and that we want to feel safety in a global way, then that encompasses the economic, the sustainable, the environmental safety criteria are met as well. So we're very attached to stability. We talked about El Dorado, but we have a stability that is there. And it's a continuation of not really challenging the will for stability, the desire for stability, and the support for multilateral system, the democratic values, mediation efforts as well. It's very strong in our foreign policy. But what happened in 2022, the aggression against Ukraine, but also the reaction of countries such as Sweden or Finland, that has definitely shifted the situation, and there's some alliances that are changing. And we are not part of the EU, but we, of course, feel European at heart, and we share the European values. When we look at the last surveys in Switzerland, polls in Switzerland on safety, well, most people in Switzerland think that security is decreasing. But there's a big will in the public opinion to defend the field of defense, the defense sector, and to promote an international cooperation in terms of defense. There's a bit of a drop in the markers on international collaboration, but another small drop in terms of neutrality. So there are less and less people who want to absolutely defend neutrality. We're still 83% of the Swiss population for neutrality, to remain neutral. We have a participative democracy. The decisions are taken by consensus or popular vote. But I think that it's very strong to me is the fact that people are looking for alliance, and this is what takes over. So that's what we started talking again with the European Union on foreign affairs, on defense policy, and even with NATO. We can see that NATO needs to take more and more responsibility, and we really want to unify our cooperation with NATO. So this is all on the table. It takes time. It goes slowly. So there's no project for immediate joining of us of those institutions. But we have very current debates on that, on our neutrality and how it can be combined with the rest of the world, with our position in the rest of the world. So I think now we have to wrap up because, of course, unfortunately, time is up. I have a regret we didn't talk about our British and Turkish friends, which are two real interesting topics in Europe, but we'll do it another time. Thank you, Philippe, for the hope that you're giving us in the capacity of European Union to manage complexity. And it could be a major stake and major in the trump card in the decisions to come. Nathalie and the ideas of legitimacy are crucial in the way we think today. Tuya, I think clearly
defense and approach that we have really something to take out of what Finland is doing.
Eric, if I may say so, there's a bit of a schizophrenic, you added a schizophrenic note to the debate, how we articulate NATO. It has to work. And also, in the background, wanting to prefer European defense, without which we will not survive. And thank you, Eric, for your out-of-the-box thinking on the reality of what's going on in the world and on the very political challenges that weigh on the relations between Europe and the US. Thank you very much to all of you.